This is Unfiltered. I'm Mike Gann. Welcome back. Another interview going straight to the source. No bullshit, just straight talk. My guest this week, none other than the son of the late, great Hall of Fame, Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff. Of course, I'm talking to Travis Orndorff. He has a podcast, Some Kind of Wonderful, where he talks to also the other kids of Hall of Fame legend wrestlers. He's been doing a lot behind the scenes, working to establish his dad's legacy, including right here on Fighters First, of course, the Mr. Wonderful collection that we launched recently. Travis, how you doing today?
Man, I'm good, Mike. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I love these interviews. We talked to George Smith. We talked to Bronwyn Billington. I love these interviews, getting a little bit behind the scenes of what not only your dad's career, but what he was like, you know, that you don't see on camera. You get to hear the stories. You get to hear who the person was, right? Like pull back the curtain and behind the scenes. We will talk lengthy about his career, obviously, all the way from WWF, WCW, some time before that in the NWA, and building up as a little known fact as the Brandon Bull, a little tribute to his high school football days. Also a little known fact, I actually live in Brandon, Florida, where he kind of got his start. So there you go. We'll talk about all that. But Travis, I kind of want to start the story with yourself. You grew up in this business. You told me off air a couple times that, you know, you were behind the scenes. You ran around in the locker rooms. You did all that stuff. What was it like as a young kid seeing your dad as this star and you just being in the locker room treating everybody like they're your friends and your playmates?
So here's the thing, you know, number one, the wrestlers that I was around, you know, they're grown adults. Mm-hmm. Many of them didn't like kids, as you can imagine. Some of them were great, you know, treated me like I was their own child, and, you know, they missed their children and would share that with me. And, you know, I know of stories of my dad being out of town and sitting down with some of the other wrestlers' kids and telling them how much he missed me or, you know, my mom. And, you know, so growing up in that, the thing about growing up with it is you're desensitized to the perceptions, because to me, that was his job. There was no emotional attachment to his work. You know, like to me, that was a paycheck, and that's how he spoke about it. Now he had a huge passion, and we had, you know, how to work a crowd. Like I heard those stories too, but at the end of the day, for my father, that was a transaction, and that was his job. Now he was hella good at it. And I'll go so far as to say wonderful, but
you have to, right? You have to.
I had to. Yeah, I
say that several times. Your license to say it about 100 times per episode.
People text me and say amazing, and I'm like, you mean wonderful. So you know, and I've shared this before, but if you grew up and your dad was a plumber and you went to people's houses and he fixed their plumbing, and you were hanging out with him in the bathroom while he was doing it, and when you got done, the people were really grateful and said, hey, thank you so much, you did a phenomenal job, and then you left and went home. That's what it's like growing up with a dad as a wrestler. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We went to do his job. The thing that was different was just the amount of fanfare when we were out in public. Yeah. So I grew up in a pretty small town just south of the airport in Atlanta. I say small town. It was small town when we moved in. You know, when we
That's
were
what
out,
they say about where I live now. It's like, Brandon used to be a small town.
Yeah.
Now it's a traffic nightmare.
Yeah. Well, it was traffic night. My grandparents lived in Brandon till they passed in the mid 90s. And it was a nightmare, becoming a nightmare back then when they built the mall. You know, when you're inside of that environment as a child, it's normal to you. Like that was completely and utterly normal. And I'll give you kind of a funny example. Was I remember I started working for a company. I was working for Best Buy, and I was a general manager. And I think I was 24, 25 years old. And I won an award, and we were flying to Florida. And it was the first time I had ever flown coach. Now, that had never crossed my mind that I grew up in first class. Yeah, you know, with my father, because everywhere we went, we had first class tickets. When I was 13, we were sitting on the top floor of the Aerobus on the way to Australia.
Was it slumming? Have you ever had to go to business class?
Oh yeah, dude. I was like, this leg room is horrible. Like I'm a fidgety attention deficit. Like I can't sit still anyway. You see me rocking in my chair.
Yeah.
You know, I turn any chair into a rocking chair. So, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I mean, even going to sporting events, I never sat in the stands. We had a booth. So there's a kind of a, you know, alternate reality where that's all I knew. So I never knew any different. And it was only later in life did I realize how different, you know, some of the experiences I had were from the rest of people's lives. Cause that's just all I knew. You know, if everywhere you went, people asked for your dad's autograph and it started when you were, you know, basically in the womb, then you become more frustrated with it. Cause you're like, just give me, you know, there was times at dinner where I'm like, give me some peace and quiet. You know, like leave us alone. I want to, you know, sit here and talk to my dad about my baseball game or, you know, whatever it was. And my dad was always respectful to the fans. And, you know, people would come up and all, you know, and he'd always say, let me finish my meal and I'll sign autographs. And so there was times where, you know, he'd go behind the kitchen because all the chefs or, you know, all the cooks wanted his autograph and he'd take pictures back there. Yeah. But he had a really, it's funny because you know, my father was bipolar. And so his emotions could be all over the place. And so could his temper at times, you know, or, you know, just kind of reactions.
Yeah, because back then bipolar wasn't what it is now where, you know, you diagnose it, you know it right off the bat. Back then it was almost like, why are you moody today? It wasn't mental health. It certainly wasn't a mental health. Yeah, back then it was like, put some dirt on it, get up. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think people realize going into the mental health thing, obviously we did the Hindu squat challenge to raise awareness for mental health awareness this month. As somebody who's dealt with depression, I am as attention deficit as like there's a scale and I'm -5 and -6, I think is like sociopath. So I'm a little nervous myself. You should be too. But, you know,
I think I'm far enough away for you to come to my house, but we're you know,
it's 8 hours. So
thanks for letting me know.
So made that drive many times on 75 South. But you know, it was like 1986. I had a counselor and it was 1986 and there was a movie on NBC that Ted Danson did. And it was talking about, you know, children being molested by, you know, a family member. And so they did a thing at the end of the show. And the end of it was like, hey, call this number if you've ever experienced it. And it was her and another lady. And they both ended up working on the President's Council for Mental Health in the Clinton administration. But they ended up thinking they were going to get 50 calls. And within a month, they had like 100 employees because they got so many calls. So, you know, and I bring that up for two reasons. One, mental health wasn't even really on the radar of most people, and certainly not wrestlers who were also abusing their bodies with alcohol, steroids, drugs, everything in between. My dad, not so much as others, but nonetheless, it was still there. And so, yeah, it was all attributed to anger and steroids, not, you know, your childhood and a lot of these other things. So he did seek mental health help, you know, later in life and was diagnosed and took the medicine and things like that and was able to stay balanced. But, you know, when the reason his arm was injured and people asked why he didn't get the surgery, I'm like, medical science and that injury and that surgery back then in 1987, like I had back surgery 4 years ago. I have the same right arm injury as my dad does. It just was, mine's actually a little worse than his. I had more nerve damage, and I had 50 staples and all that stuff. But the reason that dad didn't get help is because there was nobody to help. And when you looked at the procedures back then, they were experimental. So he didn't get that neck surgery till 96, because it was my senior year in high school. And then he had a second one in 2000 after he broke his neck in Buffalo. So, you know, when you think about his career and kind of all he went through, his ability to maintain his temper and some of those things, it was amazing with the fans, not always with Vince McMahon. And well, so
when back then the wrestlers all had a thought: if you take time off, you lose your spot.
Well, that was the rule back then. You know, when you worked in the territories, Bill Watts, for example, and everybody brings up his name. You know, you knew from week to week. Like he basically would talk to you no matter how good your match was. He would talk to you like, you may have a job next week. I'll think about it. You know, and so when Dad wanted to take time off, that mentality obviously was already, you know, you're going to lose your spot. and that's how it worked back then in the territories. I don't think Vince would have done that. But Dad didn't have the ability to really communicate with him his fears, anxieties, and concerns and just have a rational conversation. Again, my dad was, he grew up poor white trash in, Winter Park, Florida, just north of Brandon.
Before that, Winchester, Virginia, which I'm from the DC area. We know that as being like out there, like there's nothing else there.
Imagine what it was like in the 60s, when he was there. So, it was, he lived in rundown trailers, sometimes by himself. Most nights he was out picking up his dad from the bar. He bare knuckle fighted for money because that's, he needed money.
Too bad he wasn't in this generation. He got paid for that.
Oh, dude, yeah. Dad.
About that on Art
dude,
of MMA.
Me and Dad had this conversation 100 times. Dad would have been a hell of a UFC fighter if he had gotten, because he could wrestle and and he could. God, he won a rowing championship in college on a whim.
I saw a picture of that. Yeah,
his buddy and him just said, "Yeah, we'll do it," and won. Never rowed before in his life. He was naturally gifted at almost everything he did. Yeah. I mean, people always ask, because he was a drummer. He had great rhythm. There wasn't a sport he couldn't do, even golf. Like he somehow learned how to hit a golf ball in spite of his size. It was the ugliest swing you'd ever see. But
uglier than Charles Barkley?
Oh, nobody's uglier than Charles Barkley. But it wasn't, real smooth, but like he went out there, couldn't hit it. And then one day it was like crushed it. It just, and he was like that with sports. Was he like, but at the same time, and I don't mean this mean, so I would never want to disrespect my father. He was always insecure about his education, which is why he was so adamant that I went to private school. That was I went to private school my entire life, except for like 1 month. I went to public school and I was like, this sucks, man. So I went back, but his education wasn't great. So even at a young age, I can remember going with him like on autograph sessions, and somebody would say their name, and it would be a name that you would like, hey, what's your name? I go by Michael. And he would lean over and say, hey, how do I spell Michael? So when you get into some of that, the what you would learn in your typical school system, that just wasn't him. Doesn't mean he wasn't intelligent. He was extremely intelligent. Dude could
smart.
Yeah, he couldn't like, he read his Bible all the time, right? But he would read a verse, and I'm not joking, where I'm saying 10, 15, 20 times before he'd move on because he just couldn't remember it. And that was a combination.
Did he have some ADHD issues too? Because my daughter's ADHD, and she does the same thing, reads that line over and over again. And that's kind of a common trait.
Yeah, well, I'm actually going back to school for psychology. I've been in business, and I'm a VP at a bank right now. But having learned about what I went through in my depression and anxiety, and then also understanding my background and my father in particular, because we were so close. And it's so weird because you look at him and me, and we look nothing alike, but we are more alike than anybody in our family. Like the two of us are peas in a pod personality.
You say that now. I'm currently looking at a picture and looking at you, and I'm like, a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? I'm like 80% Italian. I did my DNA test. I got Orndorff on there. Growing up, people were like,
you look more like your mom.
Honestly, if you look at a picture of my mom's dad, there's pictures of us where if I put them next to each other, you wouldn't know which one it was.
Yeah.
Same haircut and everything.
That's a choice.
No, this is not a choice. God took that away naturally. That's
we're about the same age, but I was blessed with a hairline, so I take that from my Turkish roots. I
used to bartend in downtown Atlanta, and I can remember, this is in my early 20s, so this is late 90s, and so my dad was funny about my hair growing up. I had this huge bowl cut. He wouldn't let me cut it. I remember I came home with like earrings in.
Meanwhile, he had a full head of hair till he died.
Oh yeah. But I come home one day with like earrings in, my hair bleached blonde. I've got black eyeliner on, and you can see black lipstick smudge. And Dad just looks at me like, what the, you
Mr.
know,
All-American looks at his son.
oh,
who's
he's
going
like,
punk rock.
you know, oh yeah, I'm totally raved out, right? We're going to raves, you know, all that stuff. And so, yeah, his facial expressions, he just, you know, he would just shake his head, you know, and different things. And, you know, like I came home with tattoos, and he was so funny about his body. Like, there's no way on God. Dad didn't get that surgery. Part of the reason is because he didn't have a scar. Yeah. His body was his temple. So, you know, I come home just all tatted up and, you know, all this stuff. And he's just like, what, how did this happen? I could have swore, you know, and then of course, you know, you grow up.
But where's the kid that used to take these wonderful family photos? And
right now he's coming home with cigarettes on his breath at 5 a.m, smelling of booze. So, but that was a different life for sure.
Yeah. You know, we talked a little bit about it. Your dad started off very, very humble roots, you know, Winchester, Virginia, moved to the Brandon, Florida area, lived in a trailer out in Brandon, Florida, went to high school right down the street from where I live at Brandon High School, which at the time there wasn't quite as many high schools as there are now, where I think now where he lived then, he definitely wouldn't have gone to Brandon. He would have gone to one of the schools over there, probably in Riverview. But
that's right. Yeah. You're absolutely right. He would have. In fact, I remember him mentioning that. His sister Tina, they came up when Dad was, you know, at my house, and you know, in his last few days, and we were discussing how that would have been different, and they mentioned that as well, because there was only one high school at the time.
Yeah.
You know, this is 19. Hold on. Here's his athlete of the year, the Huerta Award from Hillsborough County High Schools. So, you know, so there had to be more than one, but that was 1968, 1969. So, you know,
I feel like Brandon's one of the older ones. Riverview High School, I think, is one of the older ones. But there's also a number, because obviously it goes all the way out to Plant City to, right, you know, West Tampa. So there's, I mean, it's a large area, even if it wasn't as populated then as it is.
And I think their trailer park was closer to Plant City than anything. But at the time, I could be wrong about that. But I
thought it was on the other side. I thought it was on the Palm River side.
Maybe it was Palm River. They moved twice. So, you know, and then, you know, like my mom lived on Pearl Circle, if you're familiar with that, which is right down the street from off 75, off Hillsborough, off the highway in Brandon. Okay. But, you know, again, dad grew up really humble. You know, his father was a butcher.
That whole area, just FYI, is now like a shopping center here, a shopping center there, a shopping everywhere. So
I have no doubt. I actually look a lot like my dad's dad as well. So my dad's dad is my height, 5'9". I'm more muscular than his dad was. Like I think I'm 185, maybe 11-12% body fat. He was like $150 and like 5'8". So Dad being 6 foot was actually kind of abnormal in the family. And his brother Terry's like 5. I think his brother Terry's 5'10". So Dad's size, you know. In fact, I'll tell you, Lee Haney.
Terry's still around here, right? He's like in Seffner or something like that. Right?
Yeah. He's still down there. I saw him and his sister Tina recently, you know, last year. And then my cousin Curtis, Tina's son.
That's a whole nother story, because I'm still curious why. Because he had some success early in the wrestling business, and then went into a whole totally different way. Went into construction, and you know, lived his life the way he wanted to. And I was always kind of curious why he got out of the business so quickly. But obviously, he didn't have the success your dad did, so it kind of went different directions.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a I had a counselor tell me recently, the other day. He said, "Travis, I need you to start doing things half-ass." And my dad's rule in life, like literally, this was our motto growing up: you don't do anything half-ass. Either do it or don't do it at all. Mm-hmm. That's not always a great motto, but I understood what he was trying to get to. But one day, my counselor looks at me.
I'm kind of the same, so I get it.
I was talking about work and everything, and he's like, "I need you to do everything today half-ass." And I said, "Why?" I'm like, "That's against everything I grew up with." Because your half-ass is everybody else's whole ass, and you would be better off just conserving your energy for more, as opposed to overdoing it in one. And that's how Dad was wired. Dad was intense. And if you didn't keep up imagine playing with Michael Jordan, not to say, you know, not You know what I'm saying?
No, I get it. It's like the Steve Kerr story. Like he expected so much out of his teammates.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so like even going to the gym, like my father was the most supportive man I have ever been with. For me, I mean, he truly, truly showed love on a regular basis. But when I went to the gym with him, he made it miserable. Like, and it's not funny when you're 8 or 10 or even 15 and you can't move for 3 days.
But it's installing life lessons.
Well, the thing that he didn't understand is I felt defeated, so I didn't even try it. And that was something I had to unlearn. Was it's okay, you know, because who goes into the gym and picks up the 110-pound dumbbell the first time they walk in? No. And if you did, my point being that dad's intensity could overwhelm you to the point that you would give up. And that happened to me. That happened to me in working out. It didn't happen to me in anything else because he always had a little more balance. But when it came to that, there was no other way to do it than his way. And I think Terry didn't have that same level of intensity. Good athlete. Don't misunderstand me. He wasn't my dad. So you're living
just looked up to your dad, so he wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps.
And then I guarantee dad was hammering him because dad was going at a different level, even at that time. So
I run into that sometimes because I'm one of the most competitive people you'll meet. And my daughter is one of the least competitive people you will meet. And as a parent, especially, we have more knowledge today than your dad had, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And, you kind of have to take the foot off the gas and let them be them. But at the same time, there's also a way to like keep pushing them because you don't want them to quit later in life, right?
Well, yeah,
it's always a tough fine line.
I have my oldest is 21, my youngest is 18. And, I go back to my son's freshman year in high school and he was struggling with some of his grades. And my issue wasn't his struggle. My issue was his work ethic. And so he was playing video games. And so I wrote him a schedule from the time he woke up to the time he went to bed. And I sat him down and I was like, look, here's what your school schedule looks like. Here's what you're doing right now. I've allotted you X amount of time per day for you to play your video games. So either we do my plan or you continue your plan, but here's the grades we have to, expect. And if you put in the time and you don't get the grades, we'll come up with another plan. Yeah. Well, he started crying his eyes out because I basically gave him 20 minutes of free time a day because he would be studying each class. And amazing, he put in 10 minutes and fixed every grade. And now he's going to law school. So it was.
Congratulations.
But I give my son the credit. The point is in those moments, you have to make it a teachable moment. And in that situation, that was the illusion of choice. Because, when we would go to places like Disney World, I would break down for him, do you enjoy this? Would you want to bring your family here? Okay, what do you want to do for a career? Okay, that won't afford you the ability to do this. So we've had those conversations. He's 21. He has, 800 credit. He's, he'll be able to buy a house as soon as he graduates. Those are all things that we're have to expect from ourselves with our children is make them better than we were. And dad with me, I didn't, I'm back in college now and finishing my degree. I got 2 years done. But like for me, it was always about work. So I was able to move up within my career because of my work ethic intensity. Mm-hmm. My son, I slowed down. I was like, hey, that worked for me. I took my dad's version. He helped me become this version, but I'm going to help you become this version because he didn't know this part. So, every legacy, every generation should be a little bit better. The irony is, none of us are going to end up in wrestling. We all ended up in the academic world, which is exactly what my father would have wanted.
Yeah. And never say never. Cause let's be real. We got a little sidetracked. Get back to your dad's story. He didn't plan on wrestling. He thought it was fake. He thought it was garbage. He wasn't a fan. He was playing football in high school. It was a big deal. Ended up staying local, going to the University of Tampa, becoming a big deal there, which is ironic because now I'm not even sure University of Tampa even has a football team.
They don't. They haven't had it since like 1974, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and they're a beautiful campus. I love their campus. Like I drive by it all the time because I'm always like downtown around that area. In fact, Dave Bautista just put his tattoo shop literally across the street from the campus of University of Tampa, DC Society. But speaking of tattoos, right there across from the Tampa.
I already got my next one picked out. I got my chest done last year, and I was like, all right, I'm done. and took about a year. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready.
But let's talk about that. So the story goes, and correct me if I'm wrong, because not everything's true on Wikipedia. We know this. He had gone in and out of the NFL with training camps and stuff like that, the World League and stuff like that. And he just got tired of it. He didn't want to play football anymore. He just, he had been through the ringer so many times.
Our Bruce broke his spirit in football, is what he told me. In fact, I have right here behind me, I have the game football from one of his last games in 1972. And every player on the team signed it, including, I think you might have heard of this guy, John Matuzak.
No.
Sloth from Goonies.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I wasn't thinking. I was thinking
first round draft pick for the Oakland Raiders.
I didn't know he played football. No.
Yeah, John Matuzak. So he was a first round draft pick for the Oakland Raiders.
Old. I'm not that old.
No, true. Freddie Solomon.
Neither one of us was alive for that. Okay, buddy.
Freddie Solomon played for the 49ers, Earl Bruce, and my dad. So I have this, University of Tampa football signed by all the players. It's one of the last ones they had, as I understand it.
Yeah, and there's a whole story with that. And your dad excelled at football. Like everything you said, everything he did. But the story goes that he was out of football, basically laying in his father-in-law's living room, saw wrestling come on. He was like, I can do that.
It was a Saturday morning. My grandfather's name is Rossley Maxwell. I'm Travis Lee Orndorff, so I'm named after him. And my son is Tyler Ross Orndorff, so he's named after him. So nice. I've got my first tattoo was my grandfather's name on my back. And my grandfather, he served in World War II. In fact, right over here is all of my grandfather's medals from Korea. Awesome. And all the places he served during the Asia Pacific campaign, and so he sold insurance for MetLife. And a little bit of backstory on the football thing. So when he went to the Saints, people always say, training. He was burnt out, but the truth is, one, he missed home. He did not like being away from home. He was like that when he wrestled. He hated being away from home. He was a homebody. And
it's kind of ironic because he did travel the world.
Oh, dude, why do you think he quit in 87? He wanted to be home. He hated it. Hated travel. But my dad tried to sell insurance for MetLife with my grandfather. But when he was with the Saints, they were doing some rookie hazing, and they wanted to put him in a skirt on top of a table for him to dance. And he's like, I'm not doing that, and got in a car and left. So he was burnt out, but there was some hazing, and he's like, I ain't doing that stuff. And he just booked it. That was the end of it. But he was already burnt out. So it was kind of an excuse. But so Saturday morning, he's sitting there, and the insurance thing isn't working out. And he looks at my grandfather and goes, I can do that. And my grandfather goes, okay, I'll make a call. And, I always tell people I'm 50% my grandfather and 50% my father. So, my grandfather knew everybody. He just was that guy behind the scenes that had connections.
Called Eddie Graham right up.
Yeah. And Dad was that Monday morning was at the gym with Eddie Graham and Hiro Matsuda. And they said, do 500 Hindu squats. And Dad started and without stopping did 1,000. And he was doing jumping ones. So he would go down, butt would hit his heels because he was on his toes. Then he would jump, he would come up and jump forward, then jump back and do them again. And he could do them without stopping. So it would look like a rhythm. And he could do those without stopping. And I think that day he ended up doing 2,500 total. Because they didn't tell him to stop. They were blown away. He finished, and he just kept going. They never said anything. They were like, let's see what he does. And it was like that for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. He would come in, they'd go do this. He'd be working out all day. And it was 2 months before he, set foot in a ring.
Yeah, he said, I think
he said, and this is coming from my father.
Yeah.
He said and considering he played, college football, Division I football, Florida's no joke with its athletes, even back in 1960. And he was an athlete of the year. He was a premier athlete. And so when he got done with that 8 weeks, Dad said, I was in the best shape of my entire life. What that tells me is he could have been, and the man could have been a Navy SEAL. He was recruited to be a Navy SEAL. He had that kind of head for it. that he could have endured the pain. It just, I have the utmost respect for them. That is, the only person I've ever heard that I believe could actually do that I've ever met was my father.
And Jesse Ventura.
Oh, and Jesse Ventura. Absolutely. Yeah.
Who actually was.
Yeah.
But, getting back on track, he did, he just jumped right into it. And he said in his own words, I saw an interview with him back in, I think it was 2017 when he was kind of doing those last appearances in the Canadian wrestling stuff. And he was sitting down with a talk show and some of the other guys that were on the show. And he was just like, yeah, they kicked my butt for 6 months. Hiro Matsuda and Bob Backlund beat me up every day for 6 months. And then next thing you know, they were like, all right, you got a match on Thursday or Wednesday or something like that. And that's kind of like how it went. And next thing you know, he's traveling Florida doing matches. And he didn't really know what he was doing. He knew how to fight. He knew how to protect himself. But they never really taught him how to, quote unquote, call a match, right? And he was just basically doing what he was told the first, I think he said, several years on the road. It wasn't until he got with Jimmy Snuka a couple years later down the road that they were tag team champions in the NWA that he actually learned how to actually do the business.
So I'll tell you, I was at StarCast in Nashville, and I got to sit down with Mr. Jarrett, Jerry. Number one, I'm sitting there and I see a picture of Jerry from 1974, 1975. And if you look back, that's when my dad changed his hairstyle to down the middle. Mm-hmm. That's Jeff Jarrett's hair. That's Jerry Jarrett's hairstyle. I looked at that picture and I'm like, oh my God, that's where Dad got it from. He's like, oh yeah. So Jerry was telling me, again, you hear Dad's stories and they're all
the classic split down the middle.
Yeah. The butt cut.
I don't want people to think he had a mohawk. He didn't have a mohawk.
No, the butt. I always call
he's talking about the split.
Butt cut, the Farrah Fawcett. And anyway, so Jerry was at a match, and this was when he pulled Eddie and I think Bill aside at the time, and Dad was a mid card, and Jerry pulls him aside and goes, "Listen, I got to tell you, your best wrestler is your mid card. It's Paul. You need to take him aside and teach him. Number one, he gets it because everything he does is great. You just haven't given him anymore." What's funny is how they handled it. They pulled Dad aside. They start doing more stuff and start kind of elevating him slowly. But, that was before Snuka, because I think Snuka was 79, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Right around there, yeah.
So in 78 was when he won the title from
78.
So he
December 78.
Okay, so yeah, because in May when I was born May 2nd, and Dad won the title from Ernie Ladd that month, right after I was born. I always joked that he went and won the title after, instead of coming to the hospital, which isn't true. He came to the hospital with Brian Blair, and they were looking.
It wouldn't have been surprising in that era, though.
Oh no, but not. It would surprise you if it was my dad because he was so family oriented.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have missed it. But they were sitting there looking in the the thing, and Dad, I can see him because he's a nervous wreck, just kind of going crazy. He said, "Which one's mine, Brian?" He said, "I think it's the one with all the hair." And so Dad goes, "Yeah, that one." So but yeah, a month later he's wrestling Ernie Ladd and winning the NWA title. But right before that, so you go back to 76 when he kind of really popped. That was Jerry Jarrett understanding and seeing Dad's potential intensity. The way that Jerry said it, he's like, man, he floated around the ring. He didn't run, he floated. And he was like, he's like his athletic prowess, when he would do a leapfrog, he was like he was above the third rope with his butt and legs. And keep in mind, he was probably 215 at the time, so he wasn't up to 250 until probably 82, 83. So he was nimble, and he played fullback, so he could hit you like a beast. But he also did punt returns, so he could move. In fact, when he played, I think it was FAMU. He had 2 punt returns and a rush for a touchdown. And the paper said he was the fastest white man in Florida. So, I mean, just his ability to work inside a ring and sell allowed him to learn a lot more of the techniques. And when you go back and watch my dad's repertoire of matches, and you compare it to other wrestlers, and I'm not diminishing anything, but he could do every move in the book.
It would be interesting to see him today.
And he could do it well.
If he came in today with the way they do more spot wrestling, it would be interesting to see some of the highlights he would do. Because like you said, he was just such a tremendous athlete. But one thing I do want to point out, a lot of people probably listening to this are probably like, well, why didn't he stay in Florida? And back then, you trained somewhere, but then they quickly sent you to get experience somewhere else.
Oh, yeah. So the territories.
He broke in 76, as, you know, shameless plug, you can see on Fighters First. He broke in on 76. And after, maybe only a couple months, and then they started sending him to Mid-South and sending him to Jerry and other places, right?
Yeah. So by the time I think we moved to Fayetteville, Georgia, it was right when he was going to New York. And I remember because we lived in an apartment in Riverdale, just south in 83. And so I was 5 years old. It's the first house we ever owned. My dad bought it, paid it off. My mom still lives there. So we had lived from the time I was born till when we moved to Georgia. We had lived in like 7 states. I don't remember any of it except for, but we lived, and even when we were in Florida, we didn't live in Tampa. We lived in Pensacola because he was wrestling in the Panhandle. Then we were in Louisiana, Oklahoma.
Were the Samoans there in Pensacola at the time?
I don't know if they were at the time, but yes.
I mean, I know that's like their home base now, but I didn't know at the time.
I don't know if you know this. Alpha and Sika are the ones that came up with Mr. Wonderful.
I thought Roddy did. That was just on screen? Okay.
Alpha and Sika are the ones that came up with Mr. Wonderful. So
did he work at the time? Like some of the because they have their promotion in Pennsylvania. Did he work some there?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, they were friends. He always liked the Samoan brothers, and they had some good jokes. And
I think that's one of the families I don't think very many people have a bad word to say.
I don't think you could, because they were good human beings and they were funny as hell.
From today with Roman and the Usos to back in Alpha Sika, even
they're all sweethearts.
The extension of Peter Maivia and all that are well documented. We don't need to go there, but I've never heard a bad word about the Samoan family.
Have you heard a bad thing about The Rock? And if anybody would find a bad word, it'd be one of the most popular men. He just is, everybody that works with him is like, he's a sweetheart, whether he's, it's a key grip or it's, another actor. So yeah, I think there's definitely, they've done something right in that nurture and nature thing within that family. And they just show a lot of respect for each other and family. And so Alpha and Sika were, Dad didn't have any wrestlers over to the house, but Alpha and Sika had came over when I was younger. But yeah, dad was through all those places, went through every territory, bounced around, always got over and then got moved to the next place and was always wondering if he'd have a job the next week. So that anxiety never, ever really left.
I will say, as a kid, me and my best friend, we used to love going, and it started off, obviously, dating myself, Blockbuster. They'd have like the old tapes. You go and get the VCR tapes of this and that. And then we had a shop close to us called Starland, which was for video games, but they also had old wrestling tapes. And I remember one time I bought a tape of early NWA. It might have been 81, 80, somewhere in there, maybe even 82. And I remember seeing your dad in a feud with Larry Zbyszko. And Larry would never actually fight him. He'd always send somebody else to fight him. He'd pay him $25,000, $50,000, whatever it was, to put a hit out on your dad. And I always wished we had seen that feud on the big screen, because the only time we ever saw them on the screen again, if I'm not mistaken, was back in WCW late when they were both legends and they were being super respectful and kind of beating up the new kids. It wasn't a thing that they ever really interacted again. And I always thought that was such a missed opportunity, as good as both of them were at the time. I always wish that feud had gone further.
I would tell you one of his best runs was in the late 70s with Ted DiBiase.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, Ted was a good work. And you go back. So I remember, when Dad was at WCW, there was the time. I was either in high school or I was in college. So it was, kind of that 8-year run from 92 to 2000. Mm-hmm. So, this first couple of years I was in high school, I'd go up there and visit. And then he was at the power plant. I just stopped by because I worked right down the street. So I was over at the power plant all the time. And but I remember sitting down with Larry Zbyszko one day, and he started telling me stories about Dad. And, I'm sitting there looking at him like, when did this happen? Like, I had no clue, so, yeah. And then, I had heard these names all my life, but I never knew about, like, this period of time. So I was like, you wrestled Dad? When? And he was
you got to be a real wrestling geek to see some of that.
And he knew me. He's like, oh, yeah, you were just born. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's why I don't remember it, and that happened a lot, actually, throughout the years, with people that Dad never worked with at New York, but he had worked with at Smoky Mountain or TNT or wherever else.
And you talked about a little bit moving to New York, right? Like that's what I mean. This show could be 8 hours long, and you have so much to talk about with your dad. So try to speed up a little bit. But you talk about moving to New York, obviously at a point in time where wrestling's going boom, right? Like Vince McMahon has the idea. He doesn't know if it's going to work or not, but WrestleMania, and he wants to do this with MTV and all this stuff in '85. And literally the day that Hulk Hogan beats the Iron Sheik, your dad's making his debut. And then from that point on, they were kind of attached to the hip on screen with Piper and everything else and Bob Orton. And then the feud with Hogan and Mr. T. Behind the scenes, because they're both from the Tampa area, and both trained by Hiro Matsuda, was Hogan and your dad friendly, or did they know each other very well before all that?
Yeah, for sure. If you go back, Dad and Terry wrestled a lot together in the late 70s, early 80s before he went to New York in Japan. Mm-hmm. And while, in my opinion, Hulk or Terry wasn't the best technical wrestler, he just wasn't.
He was just the most charismatic.
He had the most charisma.
Which at the time, that was more important.
Well,
people wanted to be entertained. It was a time.
Well, and it wasn't. People still thought it was real, so you could get away with a lot more. But they always had a good relationship. When I would travel, and it's just there's like little memories I have of like being with Dad when they were setting up a match before they'd go in. And Terry always kind of had his own room, and they would meet up in the middle or go meet up. So there wasn't a lot of camaraderie. Like, they weren't sitting next to each other in the locker room, but they were pretty tight. And Brian and I sat down. Brian Blair and I were talking in Vegas.
And Brian's your dad's best friend, right?
Yeah, one of his very close friends, Rick Rude. One of the Steve Austin. There was a few of them. Brian, and forgive me, that just threw me off. What was that threw off my train of thought?
We were talking about the camaraderie between Hogan and your dad.
Oh yeah. So Hogan and him, I've always thought they were pretty tight early. When it got into the 85, 86 and WrestleMania 3, I think Dad started, first of all, he was hurt, knew that his time was limited. I don't think Terry was willing to give up the belt. There was a lot of egos back then. Vince was still reigning that. Vince wasn't as much control as he is now, or, back then. It was still being, kind of groomed, and these guys' egos were growing with it. And then I think there was some, hurt feelings just because he never got the title. Dad would never say those exact words, but, if you're around him enough, you'd start to understand his emotions and what he's trying to express. I could translate, because I knew when he was being emotional and when he was being authentic, or when he was being somewhere in between, because it was always somewhere in between. But I do think there was some resentment, and I think Dad always saw himself as a better wrestler. And so I think he always felt like he deserved the belt because he was a better wrestler. And because of his work ethic and his intensity and the performance, and that, is a valid argument. How he handled it was the problem. And I think, if I was a CEO of a company, I would have been hard pressed to hand my dad a title at the time, simply because I didn't know if I could control it.
Yeah. What has your dad kind of really told you about that too? Because obviously nobody knew WrestleMania was going to be what WrestleMania is. Nobody knew, him and Roddy Piper versus Mr. T and Hulk Hogan in the main event of the very first WrestleMania. Obviously, Bob Orton in one corner, Jimmy Snuka in another corner, and they built this whole thing up. And behind the scenes, they were all, except for Mr. T, all of them were kind of cliquish, especially Piper and your dad, especially Orton. I've heard many times your dad and Bob Orton joking about if Mr. T went sideways at any point in time, he was going to get stretched. He was going to get taught a lesson because they were coming in from his world.
Yeah, Dad ran him ragged a couple of times, and so that and Dad was a snob about that till the day he died. He hated that people could just. And I'll tell you this. So
my question real quick though, and you can go ahead and tell me a story. But my question was, did he know? Because Piper said a couple of times they never really knew that was going to be what it was. Did he know that their makings were on the wall for that to be what WrestleMania became?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now he said they knew the buildup, but to the level it was with Liberace coming in, like I don't think people remember the matches. They don't remember the spectacle around it. But you had the music and you had Muhammad Ali. I mean, truly, some of the most. Cyndi Lauper was at the peak of her fame. Mm-hmm. You had some of the most popular stars from Hollywood and from the country, and it brought validation to this entertainment, and so I think they thought it was going to take off, but nothing like what it turned into. And then you have later on where when they went to Toronto for the big match, and they were expecting 10 to 15,000 people, and it was 73,000. So if anybody says they knew, there's no way. Otherwise, they would have sold 80,000 because they would have been prepared for it.
Yeah, and you were saying the story, like Mr. T came from the outside world. He was the first, not the first, but one of the first like big time, like Hollywood people to make his foot. Obviously, people remember Andy Kaufman and some other stuff. But
that's the only one I could think of before that. But there was a couple.
Well, like I said, he wasn't the first, but he was definitely a big name at the time. He was a tough guy, legitimately at the time. He was a bouncer and everything before he ever got into Hollywood. And so people considered Mr. T legit tough, whether he was or not, but he considered him legit tough. And the image was he's coming into wrestling because that's where he would fit. Him and Hulk Hogan and against Piper and your dad. And the story was behind the scenes, I've heard your dad and Orton say it, is that if he got out of line, if he somehow went into business for himself, that was going to be it for Mr. T. His career would have been over. What did your dad tell you about that story behind the scenes?
It was much more subtle than that. But
even your dog's excited about the story.
Yeah, she's in there going nuts. Dad and Roddy, their issue was, they had spent years in territories to get to this point, and on top of that, it's a main event, which was a big freaking deal to these guys. That was. Like to them, that was, in many ways, it was as good as the paycheck. So they felt disrespected that he was there. And you got to remember, they were 29 to 35 years old. I don't know what you were like at that age, but I was still pretty stupid. And so
I used to have I used to be like you at 24, 25. I was running the show, right? I was running a bar down in North Carolina, and I had two 30-something-year-old bartenders that always told me, you don't know shit until you turn 30. And I was like, you're full of shit. I'm your boss and I'm 25 years old. What are you talking about? And then you hit 30. It's like a brain switch. It's not even a joke.
And then you hit 40 and you realize I don't know anything, and that's what's going to keep me safe. But yeah, they were tough on him.
Stop dating us, Travis. Stop.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm okay. I'm okay. I've made it this far. I lived longer than I expected. They didn't take it well that they were bringing him and letting him main event. And that he was getting the level of exposure without any, background. So the Andy Kaufman thing, I think, was a lot different, and that it was a gimmick, and it, he didn't pretend to be a wrestler, or, it was.
We also don't know where
women.
We also don't know where Andy would have gone with it because he got sick, got cancer, passed away early.
Right.
We don't know where that would have gone, and that was all before WrestleMania. So
yeah, and he did he was wrestling women, and it was a great, hilarious gimmick, and that wasn't you can go back to Lanny Poffo or some of those other guys, very similar gimmicks later that just weren't kind of a different play on it. But that being said, that at the end of the day, those wrestlers, all of them grew up together, and I mean literally. They from the 22, 24 to 35, there was a decade of those guys being together, and those relationships were formed, good and bad. So they saw drug problems, kids being born, wives in and out, so forth and so on. So and they spent time together in Japan for months. I mean, like, you just can't duplicate that, with somebody you bring in from the outside in wrestling. But yeah, like I was going to tell you, like, I'm on my Facebook page, I'll get, likes and different things. Dude, 90% of those people say they're wrestlers. And then I go look at their page and it's like, well, they worked a house show for an independent wrestling. I'm like, that doesn't make you a wrestler. No offense. Like that's a hobby.
Triple H said it recently, right? Like, and he got a lot of heat for it, but at the same time, he was right. He said, we have superstars. The difference is anybody can be a professional wrestler. You can get paid $50 and go work, an independent show, and you're a professional wrestler. You got paid for it. But we have superstars. There's levels to it, and our level is what we think. And I see what you're saying with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is just because when, to me, if you're going to do that, I'm not saying you got to be like the greatest ever, but to be a retired professional wrestler, it needed to be a full-time income. I mean, like, I worked at Kroger when I was 16. I don't put, grocery bagger on my resume, right? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't say, oh yeah, I was a former Kroger employee. It was a part-time thing. And so for me, with all due respect to those individuals, I get it, but that's a hobby, and I respect that. That doesn't make you a professional wrestler.
Yeah,
you enjoy wrestling, and you've done it as a part-time hobby. I go play golf. I'm not a professional golfer.
Yeah. We talked about the reaction though it got from WrestleMania. The way it brought all these eyes around the world to the profession of wrestling, and it became a whole new thing, right? Like, all of a sudden the territories start disappearing a little bit. I mean, they never really disappeared, but didn't become
minimized.
Prevalent. Yeah, they became minimized. That's a great word for it. AWA didn't go anywhere. They had an ESPN contract. Like, I used to watch them in the bar at Chili's. We'd go to dinner, and I'd look like I would be gone. My mom would be like, "What do you want? What do you want?" And I'm like looking at the bar TV, like, because AWA's on, right? That's when I fell in love with Shawn Michaels. Like, I thought he was the greatest wrestler anyway, because my name was Michael and his name was Shawn Michaels. And it doesn't take much for like a little, like, 5-6-year-old kid, right? And you see that stuff on TV and you're like, all right, cool. And plus, he was just at a time. You talk about what your dad did. I mean, Shawn Michaels, the way he was flying around in the early 80s, you didn't see very many people doing
that. That dude could move. He was a tinier guy. I was always floored how he got over, but he just could move in the ring, man. He danced. It was like watching it's like, and I mean this as a compliment, it's like watching a hamster on your wheel and you just see him keep going. You're like, when are they going to stop? Like, he could go.
And it helped that he had veterans like Playboy Buddy Rose and them just like keeping them in check, right? Like, keeping them like, all right, cool. You get your stuff off. Now this is how we're going to finish this match. Mm-hmm. And that's a different era and a different time. But like I said, the territories didn't go away. Like, to this day, Jerry Lawler runs shows in Memphis, right? 72 years old. He's still doing his thing. But Vince took over the TV. He took over the TV. He took over the globe. You started seeing pay-per-views popping up. You started seeing other things, WrestleMania 3 in Pontiac Silverdome and all these things. And at the time, your dad's dealing with this injury. He's dealing with going from babyface to heel and back and forth with Hogan. But then, like you said, he got burned out. He was tired of the injury. 87, he kind of walked away, came back for a short period of time afterwards. And some of the greatest stuff your dad ever did was with Bobby the Brain Heenan, in my opinion. Like, I am a huge Bobby Heenan fan.
If you liked wrestling and don't like Bobby Heenan, I don't know what to talk to you about.
Before Paul Heyman, before all that stuff, look him up. Bobby Heenan was the greatest.
Bobby is the
greatest of all time.
Without question, he is, to me, one of the greatest color commentators. His calling of matches is phenomenal. He managed every personality that's ever been bigger than life. And I mean, like, he managed Andre the Giant, but if you ever watched him, he managed my dad differently than he managed Andre the Giant. Like, his presence was different, the way he interacted in the ring, how he would help dad, Bobby was the best. He will always be the best. There is Paul Heyman, I will put up there, but and I bet Paul, he's an awesome guy, but Bobby
I think Paul is the closest who've ever come to Bobby.
Agreed.
But there will never be a Bobby.
No, Bobby's
even when Bobby was fading towards the end and half his face was missing because of surgeries and cancer. If you saw him at a convention, and I never had the privilege, but I'd see interviews on videos and stuff like that, his brain still sharp as a tack. And he would laugh and he would joke despite his circumstances, but despite the fact you see this, person who's not what he used to be. And he's still like, haha, funny, let me make you laugh. And I can never say enough great things about Bobby Heenan, the person, and the character. The character will never be duplicated, ever. So
I got to, I spent time with Bobby Heenan, obviously, when I was young, and I got to spend time with him when I was older. So when we went to the Hall of Fame, Bobby inducted my dad. And during WrestleMania, I think it was 30. I don't remember which number it was, but it was back in Hollywood. I sat down, like during the whole event, Dad went down, they did a ring entry or something like that. So I'm sitting in the green room or whatever. And Bobby and I sat down and talked for probably an hour and a half and just shared stories and different things. And this is in 2005. This is after cancer, but dude, he remembered stories of when I was like 4 and 5 years old on the road with him, and he was sharing it to me. I'm like, how do you remember this? Dude, he was going at it just as if it had happened. I would love
yesterday. To know who nicknamed him the Brain, because it was so apropos.
Yeah. So intelligent. I think I told you this when I was really young. Dad and I and Bobby were out on the road, and people kept asking me what was I going to follow in my father's footsteps. And Bobby looks at me and goes, tell him no, because you can read. Most wrestlers can't read, He's like, most wrestlers can't read. You can read. So you're going to go into a different thing. And what's funny is, and I say that, it's a joke, but even back then, those wrestlers who, there wasn't a ton of them, but there was a few, they constantly were like, don't do this job, go get an education. Like Bobby down the line, like they were like, don't do this. Trust me, don't do this. And that's why many of them don't, they have family members that aren't in the business, that really family members in the business is a rare exception.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Randy Orton, clearly, like there's
exceptions, a few, but not as many as people think.
Those exceptions are so naturally gifted because they grew up knowing the ins and outs of how this works.
Yeah. And they wanted,
you can say this probably better than anybody. Everybody thinks from the outside, they got to figure it out. I've watched wrestling since I was 5 years old. And I promise you, as much as I know about the business, and I know a lot, I know wrestlers, I know people behind the scenes, I know how some things work. And I know television as well. I can promise you that if I went into that world, I would be lost because nobody knows until you're actually a part of that world.
Well, I had the opportunity on multiple occasions, so I was an actor, that's what, I went to school for and had planned on doing. One of my closest friends in middle school just hosted the Emmys and was on Saturday Night Live. And so Kenan Thompson and I grew up together and went to middle school together. Story, yeah. And, he was going to Nickelodeon.
Now he's no longer my friend on Auto Trader. Thanks a lot, Kenan.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if you heard that commercial, but it's pretty funny.
I didn't.
Basically, he was like, "Oh, none of you told me about Auto Trader. Well, you're not my friend no more, and the friendship you didn't know that we had is now over." It's like, okay.
Yeah, it's funny because when I see him, obviously I haven't talked to him in years, but it's so funny because he's the same as he was in middle school in many ways. It's not drastically different, but. So if I was going to go into wrestling, I could have been a referee, I think. But that would have probably been, but even if I want, when I was growing up, I remember my dad had a standard for what could be a wrestler. Mm-hmm. And, cause I think I went to him and said something one time. He's like, no offense, son, but you're not a genetic freak. You got to be a genetic freak to be a wrestler. That's not entirely true. Right. But that was, back in the day, you had to, their gimmicks were very, very off the wall. And, you had to have something completely different to elevate you. And Dad's standard was like, if you didn't look like him or work out like him, you weren't good enough, and that's, he knew better, but he couldn't help. But that was he just had that. Here's the expectation. Yeah. And he held that he held himself to that standard, which is why I think it was okay. But at the same time, I think I've shared this Big Show, Paul, when I was like 15 or 16, I was walking through the kitchen and, there would be, photos of different wrestlers that they were thinking about recruiting or bringing on board. And I remember at the time, me and my friend Kevin has been my best friend since I was like 13. We went into the kitchen and we're looking at photos of these wrestlers that dad's like recruiting and everything.
At the time he was more,
and we're looking at this one and it says, Paul Bunyan, and he's wearing like, the got the axe and the whole, and that was Big Show. Yeah. And, dad was like, you got to look like this. You got to be a freak. And so, like if I had even wanted to pursue it, dad would have looked at me and been like, you're 5'9" up. I think I graduated from high school at $135 wet with heavy shoes on. So, his standard for what you needed to have to go into wrestling was nothing I would have ever achieved. Ironically, though, when we were in LA, I had a couple of people from WWE recruit me. They're like, dude, you could do some stories, And so, but he didn't want me part of that world. And after, now I'm 44 and I spend time with wrestlers' kids, getting to know them. Many of them, we work together to deal with trauma as well as, talk about our stories. But it's so vital that we understand that, when you look at the history and the legacies of these men, they were the beginning of all of it. I know there was wrestling before and there's been wrestling after.
But they're without the era that we have now with television and everything. I was like,
it doesn't exist
not even television, but the entertainment side of the television. Because before that, it was just wrestling on TV, Gordon Soley or some older announcer just basically calling the action. And occasionally somebody would hit somebody with a chair and they'd be like, that would be so crazy to them. It's like, oh my God, what happened? But nowadays it's like everything is open game. Right. Anything could happen any week. And
well, think about this. How many people did you know wear robes? How many people wore nice robes before 1983? Because Ric Flair didn't have them then.
Huh? Gorgeous George.
That was it.
Buddy Rogers. Yeah.
Yep. That was it. So Olivia was Mr. Wrestling 2's wife, and she made all of Ric Flair's robes. She made Rick Rude's tights. She made Dad's robes. Like that was the generation that set a standard for entertainment and raised the bar for the spectacle between the robes, the lights, the Saturday night main event. Like, think about this. And I've said this many times when people talk about the drugs and the things and the alcohol the guys did on the road. I'm like, what would you do if you were on the road 24/7 and you had 3 channels to choose from in your hotel room? You can only work out so much. I'm not suggesting that's okay, but I have a better understanding of what it must have been like. So there wasn't access to wrestling nationwide back before USA Studios and USA started broadcasting, or even more so when they put it on NBC, Saturday Night's Main Event, because that was the first time it was available not on cable. I mean, and if it was available not on cable, it was only a local station.
I was a little kid watching Hogan and Sheik on Saturday Night's Main Event. Like in my bedroom, I had a little 13-inch, like black and white, not even color TV. And I was just like trying to keep it down so my mom didn't know I was still awake, like trying to sneak and watch it.
Yeah. So like, USA, the network, when they started broadcasting there and then on NBC, you took what was generally 9 to 12 territories in the Southeast and Northeast, and you made it a global and national brand. So that was why without WrestleMania, without New York, we don't have a national brand, and without those characters, you don't have a national brand. Dad always said Vince had the right horses to pull the chariot.
I also say, and I know there was some shady contract stuff, like he told Hogan to no-show AWA, and there's a number of other things that we could talk about that I'm sure will pop up in The Rock's new series, Tale of the Territories, but I don't think Vince actually killed the territories. It's always been my opinion is that he was more successful. He got the big TV deal. And if you're a wrestler in Georgia and you're like, how much do you want to pay me a week? Well, Vince is offering this because he has a big TV deal. Where would you want to be? If you had the choices and you didn't have the contracts you have now, you didn't have guaranteed contracts at that, where would you be? Would you be wrestling with Bill Watts down in Mid-South, or would you be Vern Gagne and AWA, who did actually have a TV deal with ESPN, but it's not like NBC USA? Like, where would you be? And of course you want to go to New York. If they're offering the door open in New York City, right? Like, there's only a handful of entertainment markets you want to be in, right? New York, LA, maybe Chicago,
now Atlanta,
and now Miami. But at the time,
yeah,
New York or LA.
It was New York, LA. Chicago stunk back then.
Yeah, and where would you want to be? And I just don't think it was even an option for a lot of these wrestlers like your dad. Like, do you know how great your dad would have been in Stampede Wrestling?
Oh, God.
Like with Stu Hart and the way they wrestled and the way your dad was physical and could literally go with anybody. Could you imagine your dad in Dynamite Kid or Bret Hart or even Jim the Anvil Neidhart back in those days, like in the early 80s in Stampede?
Oh,
it would be crazy.
Yeah, and they would have,
they would have loved him too.
And here's what happened, and I'll share this with you. Going back to the Hogan thing, I don't know about you, but I have an older brother. He's 10 years older. We might have had 3 or 2 fights in our lifetime. He basically hasn't been in my life. We don't have a relationship. I don't dislike him. He doesn't dislike me. We just, we 10 years apart.
Never exist. Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. But I still love him. Right. And that was very much like Terry and Dad's relationship. The difference was when the two of them got in the ring together, Dad raised the level and standard of the match. And I've always believed and will believe to the end. When Hogan was in a ring with my dad ran the match. When Hogan was in the ring with everybody else, Hogan ran the match. And
does that go back to the old school thinking of the heel calls the match?
What the heel calls the match, and Dad was a little bit older, had a little more tenure.
The opponent, obviously, yeah.
Had the respects of his opponent. And Dad was kind of a father figure. He was a little bit old. I think he's like 4 years older than Terry. So, and the other thing is, Dad, everybody knew Dad could whoop their butt for real. So there was a level of respect that was held just because you didn't want to piss him off.
Yeah, your dad. I've listened to Brian's stories occasionally of your dad and some of the fight with Tony Atlas on the blacktop and depending who you ask how that went, but either way, Tony's ear went missing. But before Mike Tyson, was your dad. You hear about the fights with Vader in the back, which I know you've gone out and said they've made amends years later, which is great. There's still variations of that story all over the place.
You know what's so funny? I've heard 2 versions. The one that every wrestler that was there says, and the fans version that say that that's not true because Vader said it wasn't true. Those are the only 2. And I'm not disrespecting because I don't care. I have nothing emotionally attached to it.
I don't think
I was at the house when he got done and he came home and somebody had he had to somebody stabbed him in the there was somebody that stabbed him in the back with scissors. So there was more to the story. But I would actually Buddy Lee Parker, Sarge.
Yeah, Sarge. Yeah, Sarge.
So Sarge was literally standing there, and Sarge lives down the street from me. And so him and Dad were close. So when I went to StarCast, I called Sarge up. I said, "Hey, buddy, I'm going up. My treat. Come on." So he rode with me. I'm going to trust the stories of the people that were standing there. Any other story I've heard or any other version has never come from another wrestler other than Leon and fans. That's all I know.
I will say Leon's version to me, and you can't say what somebody's going through the experience, like how they feel. Like he might not have thought Paul's punches hurt. Whatever. That's irrelevant. The stories I've heard are all pretty much, other than Leon's, I've all heard variations of the same story, like you. The only difference is whether he was wearing flip-flops, shower shoes, or if he was wearing boots. And I've heard Tony Schiavone, who was standing there, say he had boots on and he stomped Vader in the face and busted Vader wide open with his boots.
So
I've heard other people say flip-flops. I've heard Paul say shower shoes.
So are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you froze up. My dad didn't own a pair of boots. My dad wore shower shoes and flip-flops are the same thing. Dad just called them shower shoes. Yeah. Most people would call them thongs. They used to be called thong sandals. Those are the only sandals. I bought my dad's clothes half the time. We would go up to Dick's Sporting Goods or wherever. I would buy my stuff and he'd go, and there was a place called TNG All Sports. I would buy Adidas, whatever. And he'd be like, I like that. We would go up and he would buy his. So Dad and I wore the same sandals. I know that sounds like odd, but I wear flip-flops year round. I will wear a jacket, sweatpants, a hoodie, and a pair of flip-flops outside. I know they don't make any sense, but I just grew up without shoes on. Dad always said it was bad for your feet. So when we went outside, I never left the house with shoes on, ever. Like, that just wasn't how I was raised. But shower shoes, flip-flops, exact same thing. So there's no different version there. If Tony thought that there were boots, my dad didn't have any. I'd be happy to take you to his closet because the stuff is still there. Dad hadn't worn boots at that point since 1985 when he had these alligator skin cowboy boots he wore. But other than that, he had hunting boots. And I assure you, he didn't wear those to a wrestling show.
Yeah. All ever versions, even Iron Sheik, who happened to be there because he was looking for a job. Every version basically is the same. Vader basically was having a bad day. He had been recording with Eric, and everybody else over at the studios came late. Nobody at the show knew why he was late, but that part seems to be true, that he was having a bad day because he was just tired and exhausted from doing interviews all day or promos or whatever the case is. And then he comes and they got a show going on, right? The show's about to launch in like less than 2 hours. He's in a bad mood. He just wants to sit around, relax a little bit, get his wherewithal. And Paul was the guy that had to go and say, all right, Vader, it's time to go. We need this now, or we can't use you on the show tonight. And Vader was like not having it. He slapped him, knocked him down. Paul gets up, and then the rest is history. He basically beats the crap out of Vader.
So here's the story from the 4 or within 5 feet of this fight. Mm-hmm. Number one, Dad had a problem with Vader because, and this has been documented, I just don't want to speak ill of somebody that I have the utmost respect for.
I mean, both legends are passed away.
Yeah, so this is just, again, me sharing information. But Vader hurt the boys, and he had a reputation for
being rough,
rough and being stiff and hurting the boys. And Dad was, so it's funny is you would think my dad had a huge ego, which he kind of did, but not really. My dad would defend a weaker person before he would, like, if in fact, I can remember growing up, if I had ever said anything negative about somebody that was disabled or handicapped, I would have got my ass whooped in front of them at that moment. And I remember one time some guy made a joke about somebody that was handicapped, and my dad grabbed him by the shirt. And I guarantee you that guy never, like something from the movie where like, let me see your driver's license. If I hear you say this again, I'm coming to find you. Like, Dad scared the death out of this guy. So you have to know that's how my dad was wired. Mm-hmm. He was there to defend the little guy, and he always did. We were always involved in the Special Olympics and different things like that. So Leon was hurting the boys. The only reason I say, he was tired. Yes, I think he was, but Leon was hard to work with. And he could be belligerent, and he had already shown up. Yeah. He had shown up late. He was entitled, and every one of those guys got like that at some point. You just didn't know when it would happen, but they all went through it. But Vader was under contract. He was pissing off Bischoff. In my opinion, I don't know this for fact, Bischoff knew what he was doing when he sent Dad in because he knew Dad wouldn't take a shit. I don't think they expected a fight. I think they thought Vader would just give in. Was it
Bischoff or Kevin Sullivan that sent him in?
Well, Kevin was Bischoff.
Kevin was running the show, right?
Yeah, but it was Bischoff. Like,
okay.
I mean, I'm just telling you my dad's version.
Sure. So, no, absolutely. Yeah. I was just talking about what I've heard. So
I know. Kevin was the one that sent him, but yeah, it was so. But Dad came back in because Dad called him a fat F word, and they had words. Dad left. When Dad came back in, Vader sucker punched him.
Yeah.
Dad went down to his knee. Dad just turned right around and came up with a right hook. He was out on his feet, started to lean back. Dad came over the top one more time. He went down. Dad started kicking him in the face. He had on flip-flops, shower shoes, sandals, whatever you want to call them. Broke his toe. Then they started to try to break him up, and they were pulling him apart. Vader was out still. Vader started to get up, and then they just pulled him apart, and that was the end of it. And here's what I'd say. Vader just got caught with a punch. Like, that's it. Dad caught him at the right time, and Vader was standing over him, and his jaw was wide open. Dad clocked him. Dad could, whatever anybody wants to believe, Dad was stronger than human beings should be. I think I started saying that Lee Haney, who was 8-time
Mr. Olympia.
Mr. Olympia, Dad would work out with Lee in Fayetteville. I've spent time with Lee before.
Well, I mean, he started off with what? What's the legendary name in the original Hard Knock South gym? Harry. When he first started.
Yeah.
When he first got into legendary, like when he was in high school.
Yeah. Harry, I can't remember. Dad, the guy pulled Dad aside and said, "You've got a gift." Lee Haney looked at him working out my dad one day, and this is Lee's the biggest dude I've ever met, like proportionately. And he was talking to me and my pastor, my mentor, and he goes, "Whatever happened to Paul, he needs to kiss his mama and God because his gifts are God-given." He actually said he'd never seen anything like it. And that's coming from an 8-time of Mr. Olympia. So Dad was he was a unique,
and
gifted
Joe Gold
individual.
also, by the way, that was the other name I was looking for. It started Gold's Gym. They were all together. Yeah.
Yep.
You know, it's just a crazy story that people latch onto because it's a behind the scenes thing. You know, it's kind of like how the CM Punk and Young Bucks and Kenny Omega thing happened recently. Like, it's like people all want to know what's going on behind the scenes. The crazy thing is back then, while yes, Vader was suspended and never stepped foot back in the WCW ring, eventually went to WWF at the time and went on another run, which was probably the best thing actually that happened for Vader's career, right?
I think it was.
Yeah, you know, he got to work with Shawn Michaels and all those people up in New York. Paul never took a backseat to anybody. He would quickly fight you. He had a quick temper. He would absolutely, go after anybody who he thought did him wrong. The worst part about that WCW run was while he was very influential behind the scenes, kind of starting the agent role and producer role and stuff like that, is that we never really got to see the old Mr. Wonderful again, right? Like he had a couple gimmicks. He had the thing where he came out with the self-confidence issues and
I hated that crap.
Yeah, it was just a comedy kind of thing. He had what actually was a pretty good, but very short-lived feud with the Horseman, where he was power driven on the concrete. And
well, that's when he had to get surgery, so that was the setup for him to take time off. Yeah,
but it was like I wish that would have been gone further. And then, of course, unfortunately, he got hurt, came back with a lot of the young guys, and got hurt at the end. And then that was kind of it, right? But we never ever got to reclaim the greatness of the 80s, right? Like it never really kind of got to that level with his career again. But he was always revered. He was always respected. He was always loved. And he was one of those guys as a bad guy before The Rock, before Austin, as a bad guy, people still cheered for your dad. Like they still cheered for him. He was one of the first bad guys that still drew an audience clapping. Right. And I think it was him telling the story of when they were in Toronto and
he was 50-50.
Yeah, he was supposed to be the bad guy and the crowd was cheering for him.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what to do. And, that's kind of the start of the bizarro Canadian crowds, right? You never really know. Towards the end of his career, because you were old enough then at that point to kind of be aware and what's going on, did you know that was it?
Well, yeah, because
he'd come back before.
Well, here's the difference. And this is, again, some of the information that people don't know and isn't shared. So it doesn't always make sense to people. But, most of these guys that had a rerun of their 80s fame was in their mid-50s. Mm-hmm. Well, Dad was, if I'm not mistaken, he was 51 in 2000. And so, but he was a full-time employee for, when he was at the power plant, he was a full-time employee for TBS and Ted Turner.
Yeah.
So when he got injured that last time, he was on long-term disability. He wasn't allowed to go back into a ring, or he would lose, his long-term disability pay that he got for the rest of his life. So when those guys had to go back in the ring, Dad didn't have to. He went hunting every weekend and was in pain. I mean, he was permanently paralyzed. So when Dad could have come back in his mid-50s, Dad was already so hurt that had he done it, number one, he would have lost his pay, and number two, he would have got hurt again. I mean, there's no question. But somebody was asking me the other day, what would my dad say about Ric Flair? I said, I don't know what my dad would say, but if my dad was 73 and could have gotten in the ring, he'd have done it.
I'm about to say he did it at 67.
Yeah, and he shouldn't have. In fact, we were at the Hall of Fame in LA, and they wanted him to help out some wrestlers. I'm 25 years old. I'm a little too cocky for my own good, for sure. But we go in there and, Ricky Steamboat's there, Arn Anderson, Steve Kern, and they got a couple guys that they're like, hey, Paul, show them how to do a couple of these spots. And I slam my hand on the mat and I'm like, get the F out of the ring. What are you doing? And like, I'm going off. All these grown, wrestlers, all Hall of Fame, are looking at me like, who is this punk kid? And I look around, I'm like, that's my father. I'm the one that has to take him to the hospital. Don't say a word. And needless to say, none of them ever talked to me. I don't know why, but yeah, I was livid because like I was there.
You mean Arn's not going to invite you on the podcast?
I don't think so. So first of all, I'm somebody's kid. They don't care about me. I have no stature or credibility. I don't know anything about wrestling, and I don't
spend a day in the business.
Yeah. So I get it, but for me, I was there in '96 when he broke his neck, and I remember he wore this neck brace literally 24/7 for a full year. And I can remember him, I can remember feeding him and I helped him recover twice. So when he was back in that ring, I'm like, no, I'm not going through this again. And that's where, where everybody saw this job and the fame, it was an extension of himself, but it was a part of him. But to me, it was always a danger. It was never something that was necessarily ready to be revered because all I saw was the injuries.
So I'm gonna ask you two more questions before I let you get out of here. One, I do want to know what your thoughts were on his final little. I'm just gonna call it having fun. It's 2017. He jumped into the ring in CWE, Canadian Wrestling Elite, in Manitoba, Brandon, Manitoba of all places, right? Brandon, Manitoba. And he did have I think he went on a 2-week tour with him. Was that right?
To be honest with you,
it was 13 days, and he did 12 of them.
Yeah, I heard. So, long story short, but back in 2015, my dad was attacked and was beaten up, and this is when he was in bad health condition. It was by a family member, and so then he came to live with me in 2015, but wouldn't stay. He refused to stay. So he went back home.
Very
called it. At that point was when I started calling Adult Protection Services and blah 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 blah. So there was a disconnect. I was kind of cut out because everybody knew that I would raise the red flag if anything bad happened. So when he was going on some of those trips, I had gone with him a ton, but at that point I wasn't traveling with him. I was going through a divorce. There's a lot of things going on, but yeah, I heard about it after the fact. I would not have been a fan just because I don't want to see him get hurt. But at the same time, I bet that brought him more joy and fun than he had in a decade. And so the empathetic part of me is glad that he had that moment. But if I had been there, I would have stopped it. No question.
I think it's different too, right? He didn't put himself at risk. I think he did do his elbow drop, which is the only time he went to the ground. But whereas Flair cut himself open, faked a heart attack, was concussed most of the match, dehydrated most of the match, which a lot of people came off and said, why would Flair do this, right? And now Flair might even do another one. Who knows? But, that's Ric Flair's life. It is what it is. I don't have to support it. You don't have to support it. Rick,
don't watch it if you don't like it.
Exactly. But, what Paul did was kind of a little gimmicky, have fun. Haha, here's this legend in the ring.
Yeah, but if my dad,
said, I'm sure he had a smile from ear to ear when he was
my fear is, and you just have to know, little baby PTSD. If my dad get in the ring, I would have never trusted him to just do an elbow drop. Instinct takes over, and that man,
Well, you heard him on interviews, and I'm sure you've watched them too. When they did the kind of studio interviews, promoting the tour, Paul's giving advice to the young guys. He even though this was 4 years before the dementia and other stuff took him, he was very aware, and he was very much in the moment of helping people and putting people over and talking about his career and everything else. There was not a missing brain cell there. He was.
Yeah, there. It was. Yeah, that's not accurate exactly. I have no doubt about what you said. Whether or not
I'm saying perception wise,
but prior to so I'll tell you, when we had the autopsy done, the doctor was Dr. Amalu from. They did the movie Concussion. Mm-hmm. He did the autopsy, and I got a phone call from the funeral home,
CT and stuff.
Yeah, and they were like, Travis, his brain was shriveled up to the size of a child. They compared it to a raisin. like the volume. The guy that did the autopsy said, I've never seen one this bad before. And the doctor was like, there's no way he medically knew who he was the last 20 years. So what was weird was until dad moved in with me in 2015, when I was trying to protect him, was the first time I realized how bad it was. Like, he couldn't remember where the bathroom was. And it was literally across the hall from where I had him sitting. Yeah. Like, it was really, but I had talked to him on the phone 2 months before that. And you could talk to him and you would have no clue how bad it was until you were with him and you realize he couldn't function from 1 second to the next. But if you got him talking about wrestling, dude, he was all there. Yeah, automatic. It's like that part of it. And like, again, that's the short term versus long term. But like, he could sit there and tell me stories about wrestling days or even when I was a kid, but he couldn't tell me what
happened yesterday.
No, he couldn't tell me where the refrigerator was, and he just left it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's awesome because he loved helping people. Like he had such an intense work ethic, but he just loved training and developing and passing on that knowledge. And I've heard that from everybody ever interacted with. So like, you need to commit to this or whatever. And it was always sound advice. As a father, he always gave, what I'd say was great advice, just maybe not always the best words for it. So you had to interpret to get to where he was coming from. But without a doubt, I'm happy he had that. I have no doubt it brought him joy. And I have no doubt it, made people very happy to see that and see him on his feet. And at the same
didn't make
time,
the insurance company happy, but
he would, at that point, the insurance had ended, so it was irrelevant. But yeah, I mean, again, I would have just been, it's my father. He's not a wrestler to me. He's my daddy. And so,
yeah, of course,
he was tough, but I was in the room with him having a beer when he would look at me and go, Trav, I'm in so much pain. Yeah. My knees hurt. So you just got to understand that I never saw him as a wrestler. He was all, I knew who I was going home with and what he was going to deal with after that. And that was my main.
Well, so that's the perfect lead into my last question, because this is kind of a subject I've been thinking about this. We're going to talk about it this week on Slamtown and some other stuff. Do titles matter? Because you talked about how your dad was kind of a little miffed that he never got the world title in WWF at the time. And I look back at it as there are some people, and obviously he was a multi-time champion before WWF, like NWA all over the place. Some people make the championship and other people, the championship makes them. You talk about how your dad considered this a job, and when he went home, he was with his family. And this was a clock in, clock out type situation. And he was very good at what he did when he was on the clock, so to speak. In that business, I know it was a different era where the title meant way more money and it meant way more popularity. But did the title really ever matter? Because he was over regardless.
I think you'd be missing. I think you'd be missing the humanity of this if you said it didn't matter. Because I'm a vice president. I work for the bank. I'd love to be president one day.
Of course.
And if I found out that I had the opportunity, I was the next person in line, and that person, could let me get promoted, but they wouldn't let me because they didn't want to not be in power. That would piss me off if that was the reasoning behind me not getting my promotion. So I think it mattered because of ego, stature, and just, it's a resume builder. It's one of those things that you can say, I had this, he had all the Hall of Fames and stuff. Do I think he needed it? No. But imagine what the financial.
I look at Roddy Piper, who at the time was probably the second most popular person in the entire company, who didn't even get a WWF title until he got the Intercontinental title way later.
Well, and they offered Dad the Intercontinental title, and he turned it down. And that was when he was wrestling with Tito. In fact, Dad used to say, "I don't want one of those belts. They're a pain in the ass."
It took us forever to realize what belt he was holding up when WWE had that the picture gallery of his accomplishments, paying tribute to him from when he passed away, and he was holding up the green belt. And so, and I put that picture on our thing talking about him coming to Fighters First, and even I had to look the hell out of what was that title, because he was holding it up because much like with Hogan, he kind of won the title, didn't win the title, it was a disqualification, so on and so forth. But yeah, I think he would have been a great Intercontinental Champion personally.
Well, he didn't. He said this is what he said to me. He's like, they offered it. He didn't want it. He didn't. He literally told me, he's like, it's a pain in the ass to put that belt in your bag and carry it around from town to town. Like that was. I think that was his mentality about the titles in general. To answer your question, however, he was at the top of his game, and if you're at the top of your game, you want the title that comes with it. And I think he felt like he earned it, had put in his time. I don't know if he was promised anything. That was never the impression I got. But yeah, I think, if anybody would want that and for their career, I think that's completely natural. Did he need it? No. But imagine, you think about what my dad's legacy is, which I'm very proud of, the man he was, how he treated people, not just as wrestling. So to me, his legacy is without a doubt secure because of the impact he's made on people's lives. However, imagine where he would be in wrestling lore had he had the title. It just changes the narrative. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good a basketball player you are. If you don't get the title, it's still that asterisk. And I think that's just human nature. And again, I think he thought he deserved it. And at the end of the day, he was a better wrestler. And I think he thought had he had the title that they would have been that much more popular. And you don't know. It's been so popular. What's 10,000 fans one place or another in the big scheme of things. So would it have made a big difference? I don't know, but I think for him it would have been meaningful. Yeah,
I look back on different eras, different time period. Ivan Koloff had the belt for a month, right? And he has one of the most legendary careers you would ever think of among the boys, right? But in front of the camera, he was always the bad guy who made everybody else look better.
Right.
And William Regal once said he hates the word jobber because if it wasn't for those guys on the bottom of the card enhancing people on the top of the card, the people on top of the card wouldn't be on the top of the card.
Right.
Everybody traveled together. Everybody was part of the same locker room, whether you were the first match or the last match. It just really was the difference in pay and the difference in notoriety.
Right.
And that's why
still the boys. If you were there and you were a jobber, you were still one of the boys.
Barry Horowitz lost more matches than anybody. He goes into any convention, every wrestler's running up to him, shaking his hand. Good to see you, Barry.
Oh yeah.
And Mike Sharp is another guy who's legendary on Canadian wrestling and independent scene. But on TV, all we know is he wore the little thing on his arm and lost every match.
Yeah.
But behind the scenes, those people are the most important in the world because they're making everybody else look like stars.
Right. And they're taking more bumps than anybody.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with it because, title's great, but as long as you're getting paid, right, it's a job.
Yeah, but if you're at the top of your game and you're right there, and you got to remember, Dad had 11 main events with Hulk Hogan.
And you can understand why Hogan protected his spot because at the time,
because he was
in that era.
Mentality.
If you didn't have that spot, you never got it back.
Yeah, a lot of times,
especially with Vince. Vince would look at Randy. Randy got put on commentary. He didn't get his spot back till he went to WCW.
Right.
Like Mr. Perfect when he had the back injuries. Put him on the sideline. Like, I want you on the microphone. I don't want you in the ring. You can't go anymore.
Right.
And even though he could, but it was just like you lost.
And that's what my dad was afraid of with Vince. So, maybe people always wonder, well, what would have happened if he had done it different? You don't know that anything would have been different. And so to sit here and act like, well, if this happened, you don't know. We just don't know. It's kind of like when people ask me about Dad's injury. And I'm like, anybody that tells me they know how my dad got injured is delusional. There's no way you could know. There's suspicion, but to blame anybody would be irresponsible.
Yeah. Travis, I really appreciate all your time, man. It's been great hearing a lot of these stories. Definitely probably to get you on again and talk more in depth about some of these. Like I said, we could talk 8 hours or more of just your stories, let alone Paul's stories.
Oh, so, God, it would be worse than that. I'm sure. I'm so attention deficit. We'd get through 3 and I'd be telling 4 stories at the same time. And it would be ugly.
I'm absolutely loving your podcast, talking to other wrestling kids. I think that's great. Piper's Daughter was fantastic. I listened to that one from start to finish. You were telling me off air, you probably got Georgia Smith coming on. We talked to her. She's fantastic. She's done so much to boost up her dad's legacy in the British Bulldog, trying to get into the Wigan Hall of Fame. They got him into the WWE Hall of Fame. So much great stuff. We deal with Bronwyn Billington and the Dynamite Kid and all that stuff. So I love what you're doing. I'm looking forward to much more of it. any final words? You want to tell the fans at home how they can follow along with what you're doing?
You can check us out on Some Kind of Wonderful, Number Wonderful. So we've got Georgia coming on. We've got Lacey Abilene, Big Boss Man's daughter, coming on. We're going to be recording the next couple weeks. We had to take a hiatus. So we're back on recording starting next Saturday. It's been a work, a lot of things behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. You can check us out on Instagram. We post daily videos of Dad. It's under Mr. Wonderful Official. That's Mr. Number One, DERFUL. And we're also on Instagram under Paul Orndorff. But yeah, we're just having a good time. We're continuing to build and just build relationships and share our version of wrestling that we know it as.
And shameless plug right here on Fighters First. Go ahead and get the Mr. Wonderful officially licensed collection. More stuff coming soon, including flip-flops.
Awesome. All right, brother. Hey, have a great one. Thanks for bringing me on the show.
I appreciate your time, Travis. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, buddy.